from SDA Kinship, sharing our stories and journeys. And my name is Floyd Poenitz, and today it's my privilege to speak again with Jordan Leddy. If you watched last time's podcast, we heard his story about how he grew up as a pastor's kid and then came out as a gay man. And today we're going to continue the story, and I'm really happy that he has agreed to talk more with us and tell us another story. And it was a couple weeks ago, I was in Lexington, Kentucky, with the Called Conference, and Kinship actually had a booth there. We were not allowed inside the actual convention hall, so we rented Triangle Park, which is a little park across the street, and set up a couple of Kinship tables there with banners that said, welcome to Called, Kinship welcomes you, different things like that. And so we actually got a lot of foot traffic. And so the Called convention had about 5,000 plus pastors is what I'm told, and their families that attended there from all over North America. And so this was a great opportunity for people to actually hear about Kinship a little bit. And but I was not real enthused because there were some politics going on. Spectrum was not allowed to have a booth because of their affiliation with Kinship, and because of their support for Imago Gay, the podcast that Kendra Arsenault was doing. So they were not allowed to have a booth inside the actual convention. So that kind of started off with a damper. And I don't know if you knew about all this, Jordan, but it was the controversial part. So I was sitting actually at the table, and there were 3 LGBT in the title workshops, seminars that were going on. And so I had 2 of them planned. 2 of them were going concurrently at the same time. So I picked one, and then the next day I picked the other one. But we had this pastor come by the booth, and he looked at the literature, and he didn't say a whole lot. He just was kind of listening, and I was already on my high horse about, the breakout sessions. And he says, well, actually, I'm one of the panelists in the breakout session coming up, and my gay son is going to be there as well. And I swallowed hard, and I went, oh, okay, maybe I need to rethink this whole thing. And
it was definitely titled weird. That was not the title they wanted to use.
It changed a couple times or something, right?
Yeah, and so part of it was there was so much going on, at least with our panel. They wanted to have the conversation, period. They had gone back and forth who would even be on the panel, because it is such a huge deal for somebody working for the church to even suggest exploring affirmative theology, let alone like condone it. That like there was some back and forth on what should we have, what should we not have. And so the title had changed, but by the time they had like finalized the title, it was not the correct title. So even some of my friends were really upset by the title that was chosen. I was like, it shouldn't say that on the panel on the wall, but this is the real title. The proposed title, I believe, if I'm not wrong, is LGBTQ and Christian, a conversation about creating inclusive worshiping communities, was the intended ultimate like title, what this was about. It had said something about LGBT evangelism, considering evangelism or something like that, which was not the idea of the topic at the time.
It kind of whitewashed it just a little bit or something.
Yeah. And I could see that, right? Like being like, oh, what are they going to say about us if I was just walking by and I saw that? And then, of course, I'd be there. I'd be like, heck yeah, I want to see what they have to say.
Right,
but,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So let me take this opportunity then to officially welcome Jordan Leddy to the podcast here and let him tell how he came about being a part of this panel that I was totally blown away with. Because I had no idea it was going to be affirming, and it was just like my jaw dropped. I don't know if you saw, there was a few of us sitting in the audience, and I don't know if you saw us going like this all the time.
Yeah.
When you were talking and trying to Yeah, the affirmative. So
yeah, it was probably not what you expected. I didn't
not at
think
all.
twice. I was like, yeah, we'll come and do this thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
how did it start? Well, I mean, how did you get invited? And
yeah, so I mean, Jordan Leddy, I'm a pastor's son. I went into the clinical counseling field, and so I started my, coming out. There was a whole episode about that that we just did, but I was exploring with my work. We had some clients that were LGBT. We had some staff that were, I believe they wanted to do what's right, but they were using incorrect, outdated lingos, terminology, like things like, that it probably wasn't the best. So I had talked to my boss about like, can you in the next meeting, like talk about that? And, at the first it turned into like, I can create for you this like outline of like what you want to go over, and it turned into, Jordan, would you just like to take over that part of the diversity training? The PowerPoint I was using was something I had created in my Loma Linda master's program when I was going through the master's program to become a therapist. They let us choose this topic based on researching something. So me and a couple friends, we did a topic on like reaching out LGBT as clinicians, as therapists and things like that. What do we need to consider? Like as a special population? And that was a series that we had done. And it was like 3 weeks of every single class. Everybody's bored. They're on their phones. Because everybody has to present one by one. But when ours came up, the phones were down. The whole class was looking at us. They were very interested. They had tons of questions. I could tell they were actually paying attention, not just like, as long as one person answers, nobody gets mad and tells them everybody put their phones away. But it was like a moment where somebody had said, she had grown up in a different church environment that was very big on like the deep culture, similar to Adventism, and came there. So she was like, I just have never actually even had any interactions with LGBT people. And it's something that she's scared of, because she knows that one day that this could come across her table as sit in the other chair, somebody who's going through an LGBT issue. And she has no like point of reference on that. And so she was like, I want to just gobble up as much information as I can, because eventually I'm going to be set back out in the world. I'm living in a state where that's probably like not as, like an option for them to find someone better, because there may be some, outdated therapists, around me. And I was like, okay, so that was like the beginning of that. Told my boss about it. I got to teach there. And then my next job, I told them I had done that, and they asked me to come speak at their LGBT diversity training there. It turned into somebody who made that PowerPoint with me was working with the San Bernardino County in California, which is the largest county in the United States, Department of Behavioral Health. And she was supposed to do a topic for one of their task forces there for Pride Month on clinicians reaching out to LGBT again. But she got sick and I took over and I got to do that. I also spoke with PFLAG in that same time frame. And then after that, I did more of like a mental health, not like an LGBT, but mental health at a church. They wanted me to come talk about that. So I was doing that. And my dad was, able to listen in on some of those, that were streamed or things like that. And he was just like, wow, because he's a pastor and he's like, game recognized game, like, how to talk. And he was like, what do you say about like, if we were to do something together on this, like, do some like workshops or trainings in the way I think Chris Blake, who's amazing, who's one of my professors, he goes and does workshops at churches that want to create like a mission statement that includes LGBT as part of that. And I was able to sit on the panel for that as well, to be like somebody to talk and be open. But I had done all these things. My dad was like, let's do something together. And I was like, I mean, yeah, if it happens, it happens, me and my dad are like more, we like to be organized, but it's not like 100% organized kind of situation. So I'm like, yeah, I mean, just let me know, give me a time. And so I think about a year ago, he had mentioned like, we're going to do a whole thing at Called. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And so he was like, it is the North American division. It's a convention for all the pastors across the North America to come together. And I'm like, oh, no way they would let us do that. He's like, I don't know. We're working on it. And they had been working on this since before the last Called, I think. And they had changed it, and the people that were on it were kind of doing a little bit like, like, oh, okay, we can talk about like how, basically describing reparative therapy or conversion therapy. That is not what we consider even in like the American Psychological Association has banned that from all therapists to work on, because they don't find any evidence that works. Even some of the the church programs that did it like shut down and claimed, we actually don't think we changed anybody. We probably made it worse. Like they even said that themselves, shut down. Like, so like that is something that my dad was like, no, we're not doing that. So that's why it kind of changed hands. It changed titles over time, but he had told me, let's do this. I'm like, all right, sure, whenever it happens, but I never expected it to happen. Then about 2 weeks before this year's called in Kentucky, of all places, I was like, getting a call from my dad, like, hey, it's happening. And I'm like, what? And he's like, we're going to do it. We want you on board. He's like, I don't know if you can get off from work. I had just started this job. And I was like, I don't know. I'll have to ask, I'd like to. And I said, if I can't, can I find somebody else? And he was like, no, they want you because of your background. You're like wanting to still be so SDA. You were brought up in the roots of SDA. I think like they're saying that you're like such this like perfect, like cross section. We're not just bringing in like just any LGBT person. We're bringing in a church member. We're bringing in a pastor's child. We're bringing in somebody that like really wanted to stay SDA more than they wanted to even like say come out. And so he said that's why he wanted me specifically, and if it wasn't me, that they would just have the conversation, just pastors. And I was like, whoa, that's big. Yeah. So I'm like, I gotta go. Go. Yeah. So yeah, we made it work. I think all the hotel blocks were blocked out, but my dad got an Airbnb, and so they said, yeah, I could stay in there, and it was like 3-bedroom and there's 2 of us, so it worked out. And then we got the plane ticket, and I think like 9,000 flights were canceled on that from Thursday to Saturday when I was flying in. I really wanted to fly in so I could be there for Father's Day with my dad. I had a couple of friends that were supposed to go, I could hang out with them, but really it turned out I had to reschedule. So I got a Father's Day dinner. So that was awesome. But I flew in Father's Day night, had dinner, went to bed, woke up, got ready for this thing, did it. And then we were like, yeah, we'll hang out. We'll come see you in, Triangle Park? And then I was like, oh, wait, we have to get on the plane. And I just got out of there. So it was in and out for real, just that fast. I wish I actually had stayed longer. I was like, please cancel this flight, because then I have an excuse to stay, because I was really enjoying Called. I forgot how many pastors you grew up knowing when you're a pastor's kid.
Yeah. So, but going in, I mean, it seems like it happened all really quickly, and you didn't even have time to panic or do anything.
Oh yeah, I didn't think twice of it. This year, Loma Linda also held like some Pride Month things as well. Mm-hmm. So with Dillis Brooks as one of the chaplains there, I got to sit on 2 different panels actually, with Loma Linda, and they did like a little virtual kind of talk about it. So one was more about like LGBT as Christians, as students. I was an alumni, of course. And then the next one was more, as students and alumni, like more to the clinician side, which of course I had experience talking about. Both of them are really great. I got this like rainbow lanyard from that. I'm very proud of it because I think it was Loma Linda's first like real acknowledgement of Pride Month. And then they were just handing out to every student these lanyards, say Loma Linda, the rainbow. It was really cool. So I was able to do that. So for me, I was like, all right, just a busy month. I'm just going to like go on all these panels and just talk and just do it. It's really cool. I get to see my dad. But it was a big deal because, this is a convention for pastors. So it's not just anybody. These are pastors. These are the ones that are like, that are theologians. They have studied deeply the Bible. It's probably like going to be the hardest to like even suggest to them that there may be another way to look at this in the Bible. I don't consider myself a theologian. For the most part, any of the panels I sat on, that was something we had talked about. Like, let's not try to talk about the affirming theology debate, because that's just going to turn into, ways to discredit and not listen. Versus like what's more important is like, hey, we're here and they're suffering and LGBT people are not being included, and we're not even having conversations on how to do it better. We're just saying it's not right. And then we're kind of joining this wild fray of people that are justifying, because it's not biblically right in their mind, that they can also now be awful to the LGBT community. And it starts with at least having conversations, at least like talking about the pain that we're causing, despite if you come around to an affirming stance or finding a celibate stance, there just needs to be a stance of love and just, in your heart. And so that was kind of like the point of this topic, is like, how do we create that inclusion, in this thing? So we're doing with pastors. I felt great, because I'm like, sweet, my dad's there. Nobody messes with my dad.
Your dad's on one side of you, Dillis is on the other.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you knew Dillis already. Did you know Alex as well?
No, I met Alex there. Like I walked in, they're like setting up the mics, and he's like, "Here, hold on," and I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm Jordan." We were like, "Oh," so
Cool. Cool.
yeah, but yeah, so it was pretty scary. It's also Kentucky. I looked it up because I mean, it's something that you probably don't have to think about unless you're maybe an LGBT person. That like a privilege to not think I should look up if this is even a safe area for me to like walk into. And I did. I had to look it up. I found Kentucky is rated the 5th worst state to be LGBT in the United States. So out of 50, it was 45. Wow. Luckily, they say it's a little bit better in Louisville, a little bit better in Lexington than other areas, of course. And then most of this reasoning that this website I was reading had was more of like, if you're a citizen there, like you don't have as many rights rather than like, the danger side of it. So I was like,
danger.
yeah. So, but there's still a chance, right? I mean, it's a really, really red area, really wild politician making things happen out of that state. So I mean, there's a lot to like consider. And of course, these are Christians, these are pastors. We are doing something very radical to try to even challenge a pastor that they may not have looked at the Bible a different way than somebody else. Like that is wild to them. So I mean, there's gonna be some heat, and we expect that. I was ready to go. I was like, yeah, let's make some change, because that's like how I feel my calling is. Like I was maybe built for moments like these, so I'm like, I'm ready to go. I have the confidence of my pastor dad, who's way too confident, and I have the knowledge of this person of the psychology field, and I'm like, let's just do it, get it over with. I'm getting back on the plane anyway. But that was not the reaction of my loved ones. My dad, of course, he's like really excited I'm going. My mom's busy with all these camp meetings, and things that she's doing. But my boyfriend was not for it. He did not want me to go. My friends really didn't want me to go because they just had this vision in their head of like, especially with what was going on during Pride Month with Proud Boys and showing up with guns and wanting to kill drag queens. It was really, really huge this year. Anti-gay sentiment, like wildly huge. And, people getting arrested with AK-47s outside of Pride events, and they're seeing this on the news. And they're like, you cannot go. I don't want you to, because I believe that you're going to be shot. Someone's going to kill you for doing this. And I was just I'm like, no, Adventists, no, of course not, but there was a piece of me where I was like, uh-oh, like a little bit, but I was just so confident. I was like, my dad's going to be there. Everything's going to be fine. My dad's just like, you're the child, that he's your hero. It doesn't matter who it was. That's your dad. He's there. He's excited. He doesn't think it's going to be a problem. I don't think it's going to be a problem. If Adventist pastors, like I know Adventist pastors, I'm like, the worst I'm going to get is like some heckling. And because we're not really a rowdy bunch, us Adventists. We don't drink. That's a big part of it. We don't even dance. So I mean, like we're not really wild, and we have a long history.
Laid hands on you and prayed,
they could have,
like that, whatever.
Right. Maybe not so much now, but even we had that history, like Desmond Doss, the conscientious objectors, so I mean, like our culture is not as I would say radicalized, maybe as some other ones, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen, because we are influenced by the world we're in. Right. And so, but there was sentiment that I had friends of mine, they were showing me it could be perfectly legal, that they would like let me bring a gun or let me bring a bulletproof vest, and how it would be perfectly legal. And I'm like, no way, I'm not bringing a gun as a carry-on, or like not carry-on, as a under the plane. There's no way I'm going to get okay with this, like it's not great. Live by the sword, die by the sword. I was like, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, it ended up in a few like arguments with my boyfriend because of that, because he's like, you're at least going to get jumped, you're at least going to get beat up. And I was like, if anything happens to me, my biggest regret would be that I would miss out on all of the Adventist drama on social media. If that had happened, I was like, dang, that would be sad. And he's like, what about me? I'm like, yes, you too, of course, you and the cat. But yeah, I think that was kind of the problem. And I had mentioned that in the panel, like when I was talking about this, is that essentially we're not having the conversations we need to have. We're not creating the safety we need to create. And because we're allowing us to not have conversations, the loudest voice of the anti-gay is speaking louder. It's creating the unsafety, and it's creating this failure we've had as a system, even as Adventists, where people believed I was going to be killed just for coming and saying like, hey, I'm a gay person, let's have more conversation. That is the assumption right now of Christianity, especially right now in this political climate. It was of Seventh-day Adventists. And I know they didn't, my friends and that I'm talking about and my boyfriend, they didn't grow up Seventh-day Adventists or anything like that. So they don't have maybe a similar connection as I do to it. But there was still risk, of course. And there were times in that panel where, people come in late and there's no seats in the back, so they have to come to the front. But they, pastors, they're confident. They just walk to the front. I'm like, oh, is this the moment? And just internally, I'm like, externally, I'm like doing my therapist face.
I was watching I'm like, your face the whole time. Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, is this guy coming up to get us? Like, okay, no, of course not. But it was scary. It's a red state. It's lots of pro-gun stuff. There's lots of danger out there. It was something scary to have done. And I didn't think twice really about that until after I came back. I landed, did my second panel with Loma Linda, went to work as if nothing had happened. And I was like, wait a minute. Did I really just do all that? Did I really just risk it all? And I'd really just go tell 200 pastors in a panel room that like, hey, like we have to stop this, accepted theology. And like, maybe we read the Bible wrong too, or maybe it's worth to even just have the conversations. I just like told pastors, in that moment, I was like, I really told pastors off, and I'm not a pastor. I don't feel like I'm on I didn't consider myself theologian all those other times. And I still don't think I'm like a deep theologian, of course, but I was like, how can I have a say? How did I do that? I just did it. It was there for that, it's like, it's, I don't know, Elijah probably had some of those anxiety moments and Jonah, of course, I think they had those after your
stories. So it was like, I mean, you knew what you were saying. I mean, it was you.
Right. So. So similar to my coming out story was a big part of what I talked about. The other three pastors that were there, they're the ones I think that actually risked more at the end. And I said that in the talk as well. I think that that was huge because there's a lot of, like Floyd and, you and I were like, we're LGBT. It's part of who we are. We can't fix that. We can't go back. If it was a choice, we wouldn't have chosen it. So of course we have no other stance but to say like defend ourselves, right? For somebody who's not LGBT to stand up there and not only just like risk it all, like risk their jobs, because that, like you had talked about, Spectrum getting into trouble for supporting an affirmative, stance. That is something that these pastors might be facing and getting on certain lists of don't ask them to speak is the minimum, all the way up to like, sorry, we can't keep you for this.
Right.
So that was huge, as brave as people were saying I am, I'm like, hey, I've done this 1,000 times. And at the end of the day, like, I know my church is pretty cool. If you're really mad and like, where are you from? Oh, okay. Like North Dakota. Okay, cool. Like, I pray for your congregation and we'll come around someday, but I'm going to go keep living my life. Right. I'm not going to get fired over this.
Yeah. I mean, you got to get on the plane and leave.
Yeah, I got to get out of there.
You made waves and left.
Right. And it wasn't even really, I didn't realize how huge this was until right after. And of course, Floyd, you came up to me, Alicia Johnston, other people came up and like shared their stories a little bit and like thanked me or like asked me questions and things like that. And I realized this was huge, and I think Alicia's the one that like made me like really triple think all that, like how big that was, being an openly gay person asked to speak at Called was huge, because like you said, like Kinship wasn't allowed to have a booth, even Spectrum's not allowed to have a booth, Alicia's not allowed to have a voice there. If her name was on that billboard, she would have been like, they would have like made sure it wasn't, they would have made sure she couldn't talk. But I had that little bit of feeling where I'm like, Alicia is this other version of me that had, another path where it's like, I felt like maybe she would have been the best person on that panel because she had gone through seminary and is Seventh-day Adventist pastor. She has also like a master's in psychology. So I had a master's in counseling, so she's like this in my head, this other version of me who like went so much deeper, and she's like more qualified in my head to have been on there. But at the same time, maybe just because I was maybe like an under the radar name, that's how I was like able to get in that way. And I don't know.
You told me it's all who you know. and you knew your dad. So
Yeah. Well, and he's even on this path because he knows me,
yeah.
I talked about that he was doing his own, like he had church members that he had that were, either identifying or keeping it like on low key or something in his church. And he was like, they're all the same disciples to me. And so he was trying to find ways to like make sense of this. How can this be something so banned if it doesn't make sense? Everything else kind of made sense in the Bible, why this is yes and this is no, but this one just didn't make sense. So he was struggling to find that. Since me coming out, he did it like obviously like 3 times as hard, because it's like he has his own cognitive dissonance. My mom also had her own cognitive dissonance of like, it's not just like, oh, love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, of course we love it. Oh yeah, the gay people, they can come here if they want. It is like all those things that you might think, any kind of like conditions you have, suddenly it has to apply to somebody you love as well. So you can say that you're accepting, but then it's like, well, but they're, hopefully they come around, is kind of in the back of your mind, versus like your own child. And I feel like that is the most intense version. I think for anybody that is like, maybe not LGBT, who's experiencing that cognitive distance is a parent to a child. But of course that's happening with, friend to friend, brother and sister. That's happening to, just church members, like coming to terms with that, people that you really cared about in some way in our church, and watching them leave, and then kind of having to go, I'm best friends with this person for 6 days out of the week, and then I go somewhere on the 7th day where I know they can't come with me. And that's like really tough for people. And we're not having those conversations. But my dad is there because he triple, double down, whatever. And he started talking to pastors who had affirmative theology that he was just struggling to come to terms with. He started reading these books. He's on a page like ahead of me, even like I'm like reading Matthew Vine's book, and I have skepticisms. I'm like fully like, yeah, affirmative, but I'm like listening to him, and I still have these defense modes because of how I was raised and how I'm going back, and I'm just like, you can't say that, Matthew Vine. I'm like, that's not going to work, and it doesn't make sense. And then he always comes around. I'm like, okay, I see that. And so I'm really trying to listen intentionally and listen as if, maybe on the defensive is helpful, because I can know how somebody else might think. But my dad's there. Like he's up there on that panel. He's talking about, even calling somebody to celibacy is a major disservice. It's not biblical to call someone else to celibacy. It is an internal call. There's verses in the Bible that I don't know if it's Jesus or Paul, they were talking about like, no, like you don't just get to choose celibacy. You have to be called. You better get married then, because they were talking about in the Bible, like, well, since women are ultimately going to result in sin for us, we're just going to go ahead and just cut all that out. And he was like, no, like you can't do that. That's not what you're supposed to do. But my dad's like sitting there, I'm like in the call, and I'm like, oh, my dad, like I'd never even heard that theology until literally like that morning. He was kind of referencing it, and then we went in there and he's like saying it like confidently out loud. I was like, what? Even I wouldn't have said that, but of course that's because he has that awesome ability to like, have already done a lot of theology work with that. Whereas, I go and I do therapy. And so I can do my own research, but it definitely is not like tied into what I'm already working on. Right. So I'm doing more on trauma work, and the coming out process is like a psychological thing. He's doing it from a theological. And that was really great with that teamwork we were able to provide me and my dad and Dillis and Alex as well. It was awesome. And it was actually really fun to just sit and like watch them and like, clap back a little bit to some of those questions in the crowd. And I think ultimately there are so many, I think pastors especially, who want that, to strive for that. Like they feel that pull in their heart, like God is love and God is calling us to love others. But they just don't know how. Because what we're taught it very specifically, even when you go to seminary, you have to like sign, if you're a teacher, that you have to, believe in these stances, one of them being that you can't teach affirmative theology. So it's just, that's what they know. And they're trying to find a way about it, but they also don't want to fall into this like trap of like, well, I'm going to pick and choose what I like out of the Bible. I think Alicia Johnson's book that's coming out is really great, because she's really good at like coming at it almost really from a conservative point of view, as to like, you can be affirmative and it's actually the more conservative position, which sounds wild as I'm just like summarizing like that. But she is, of all the documentaries and books I've read on this, probably the most gentle, guided person into all that process on a theology standpoint of anybody I've ever read. And I really do mean that, because I've watched a lot of documentaries and I've read 2 books on this topic. And so it's just really great. And I think a lot of pastors out there want this and they strive for this. They just don't know how to say yes to it yet.
Yeah.
Kind of, even my like coming out process, I had a big denial period. And then even my depression period, because I knew this was happening to me, but I couldn't understand. I couldn't find a way to like justify it either. It took a while for me to like really see it this way, and even to do my own research into like what affirmative theology can show us in understanding the hermeneutics and the historical context of the Bible, and these verses maybe not mean exactly what we had assumed in our current knowledge, our current language, a current translation of the original language, and all this stuff. Like there's a lot to like look at that may not be what meets the eye. But pastors are like, but this is what we know, and they want to find a way to love without shaking their faith, or even like suggesting that, well, if I can change the stance that we've held for all this time, then what else can be changed? What else is just willy-nilly and just fake and can be changed, and like we lose ourselves. But there was a call that this doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be that you look into affirmative theology and lose everything on the path down. It's not a slippery slope. But it's definitely a climb to get there, but you're not going to slip off and end up worse off than where you were. And I think that's what our whole point of that panel was. Like, how do we create this inclusive worshiping community? Because there are risks to us not having these conversations. And that is, our kids are growing up in a church where they don't feel connected. They don't feel that they belong because they're being told that literally. The LGBT people have chosen this other path and they're not going to be in heaven. And they're just like doing these other things. And they're these others. They're these like dancing naked people in the streets. And they're, all these things. And that's the only image that's being given. So when you're growing up and you're coming to terms with your own internal struggle, if you're an LGBT person, you realize that my entire life, all the loved ones and church family and literal family have ever told me is that I will not be, that if an LGBT person's here, they're not going to be accepted. I'm not going to be accepted. So then there's a turnoff to God, because our family, our church family, other Christians are that image of God's love. And when that image is like, we have this perfect excuse to be not loved to one community, that's all that community knows. Mm-hmm. All they know is hate and hypocrisy. And it's like, you said this is about love, but you had one condition and it was me. And so why would they come back? We're not creating the openness in the conversations. And like I said many times, that even if you don't come around to like an affirmative stance, what are we doing that is putting in these barriers, that is not letting these people find love, that is saying that you can come, but only if you abandon the person that loves you unconditionally to be with us, who might still have some reservations. Like, what does that mean, where it's like you have to sacrifice such a huge part of your life before you even come into the church, where we don't do that with certain other things. Mm-hmm. And that's just the conversations we need to start having, even if they get heated, and even if it's a little bit of clap here and a clap there and like a little like debate. That's what needs to happen, because
we have to have that.
For so long we're not talking about it. And those discussions need to be, definitely. And that was the impression that I came away from Called with, is that there is a big desire among pastors to have that. Mm. And it feels like the official church is kind of squelching that and not ready to have that conversation. But I feel the conversation is going to happen whether the church is ready for it or not, because of people like you and the panel. And, I was watching your face the whole time. I was ready to pounce on anybody who was going to hurt you. Thanks, Floyd.
Because it was like, okay, don't you dare. And then, you had your supportive father on one side, and Dillis, mm-hmm. who I had never met before, but I'm ride or die for Dillis forever. I want her to be my new best friend forever. She's amazing. She was just wonderful. And some of the people that were standing up and making comments, she just honed right in on them. And it was like, yeah. So what did you feel was coming from the room? Because I know some people had Q&As at the end, questions, and some of them were not. Some of them were what I expected, and others were very affirmative. And so, share a little of what you remember from those questions.
Yeah, I would say, like, for the most part, I was a little surprised. I think there is. In all fairness, I knew I was walking into, right? Like, I know I'm walking into a crowd that is like here to be like, but wait,
Yeah.
and part of that I think is just we are challenging the deepest seated part of their life. Like, it's not just their part of their identity that's religion. It's like the religion is their identity, their creed, their theology. That is what they do for a living. That's what they love the most. It'd be like walking into me and telling me that Darth Vader's the worst villain ever. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. That's going to cause problems. I'm going to have something to say about that, and you better be like ready to prove it to me, and I'm going to try my best to prove you wrong, because I love Darth Vader. He's a good redemptive figure, by the way. There's religious undertones anyways, but yeah, so I mean, that's kind of what's happening here, is that these are people, it's like, they may want this, but they're just waiting for that right moment, like that right thing to be said, but it's not going to be said. You're not going to have somebody come in one day and be like, here, perfect solution, when maybe there's defensiveness, and it's going to take more than talking about like the Bible is clear is the term that was used there. It's used a lot. But the Bible is clear is a way to shut Bibles. As Alicia says, it's more likely to shut Bibles than to open them. It's not a way to say like, okay, well, let's talk about this again. Let's look at it again. And I think that's what it's going to take, is that we're going to look at things again and again and again. And even maybe some of the affirmative theology that we have today may later be challenged in other ways. We may find another way to look at it. Not that we maybe regress, but just like we learn and understand as things. I think historically, it's the church leaders were the educated. They were the ones that were like studying. Universities, it was like church leaders, because they were able to do that. And I think we can still do that, and it comes with the importance of like reading more. So when we're in there, we're saying like, hey, we're going to challenge some deep-seated core belief systems here. There's going to be people that stood up and asked these questions. And for the most part, I was very surprised and pleased to even hear like the ones that are having hard challenges asking the questions, because the reason they're asking questions is that in some small space, they're opening themselves up to hear the reply. Whether or not they're open to accept the reply is a different story, but like they're here to hear that reply. And I think the people we had on that panel were just ready to like say, hey, like, all right, I got the reply for you. It's not going to be an easy thing to swallow, but here it is. And so I think as pastor to pastor, they were able to do that in a way I couldn't do that just as, a gay person. I could easily be like, well, he's not a theologian like us. He didn't study the Bible like us. He didn't study the Greek and the Hebrew like us, but then there's people on this panel that did. Though he doesn't understand what it means to be a pastor. How am I supposed to say this to my church member when they think this, So some of those questions I did also think come from this lack of engagement with the LGBT community. I think there is still a deep-seated association with somebody identifying this way, and immediately the image is automatically in the alternate sex acts they must be doing. And so then, because that's the initial image of it as a sexual identity, there's the assumption that automatically this is a sexual sin somehow. And what the LGBT community is saying is like, there's so much more to us than maybe what we're into. And we don't even like talk about it that way. It's just about our attraction is not the same as yours. And so it's not about like, we're begging to have sexual intercourse in a certain way. That's not even what we're talking about. And I think that's where some of the misconceptions are coming, and they're making maybe false equivalencies. Well, what if I had, a church member who was, doing like, polygamy or things like that. And it's, what would I say to them, and how is it this different? And what I have to say to that personally is like, if a new young couple comes into the church, we don't ask them, hey, what kind of sex are you having before we let you help out and create a role. So it's just kind of like, it's such a strange concept. It's more than just this idea of, you don't understand an LGBT person, the stories you're being told is of like this sexual immorality of it all, and then you think that's the whole identity, and it's not. There's so much more to it, and it's not a sexual immorality thing. It's just something else, and I think that's where a lot of that was coming from, and that's why more conversations need to be had, because how is somebody supposed to learn something different if they haven't even been open to like learning that, right? And so it did come from there. So there was a few questions that were amazing. There's a few questions where I was like, oh, oof, but I think that my co-panelists were just really nailing it in there. My dad said he could have gone all day. Like he would love to like have talks with the pastors all day long that wanted to have those kinds of discussions. So he wishes that our time wasn't up. And he was really in the zone. I saw my dad on fire in there, so
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It did really end way too soon. I could have gone on for another hour easily. So yeah. Wow. Do you think that, I mean, call will be, well, normally every 5 years, but because of the pandemic, it'll be in 3 years, the next call. Do you think it's possible to have another panel that could be similar?
I think it is possible. If it was year to year, I think there'd be probably a protection to make sure it doesn't happen next year. But I think it planted a seed, and a seed can grow a lot in 5 years. Discussions can be had in 5 years. I think hopefully, that was my goal, is plant the seed. Like, I'm not here to watch it become the full, perfect, nourishing tree now, but I think at time, like, more conversations are being had. We're facing, my generation, the millennials, are leaving the church faster, and Generation Z as well, than any other generation. And when they do these surveys, like, why aren't you part of the church? I think almost all of them, if not all of them, the number one reason says because of the way the church is treating LGBT people. So that's non-LGBT people recognizing that. And so that example I gave of the metaphor, or the example person that is like, I'm spending 6 days with like the best friend I've ever had in my life, and then on the seventh day, I'm coming into a place where I can't even be with them. They're seeing that. And it's because we don't even have the conversation. We're not even having the conversation, even if you're not on the same side theologically as us. We're not even having the conversation about how to create safety and love and bringing people back in, because we're just having no conversation. And so the voice that is being heard is only the voice of the anti, the people that are maybe like questioning or are centrist or don't know yet. They're not speaking up. Like when somebody says, gay people are abominations, they're not like, well, I don't know yet. They don't say that. So then you don't know who's safe to talk to. The people that want to affirm, maybe are affirming, are probably even scared, because there's a lot of anti and hate language that's going on. In fact, my own mom, when I came out, she struggled more than my dad, really, in the sense of like, how do I think about this? Like, obviously she says she loves me and everything, that was never going to change. But for her, it was like, I don't even know how to process this. And she's very social. She wants to process that, like with talking to somebody, and my dad was more ready than her. So she's like, I need to talk to some more people, what other people think. But she said she didn't know who to talk to. How can she turn to somebody when there's been no voices? And the last thing she needed to hear was like, I'm going to open up to my friend at church who we talk about all this stuff together. My son just came out to me as gay. And just the last thing she wants to hear is like, oh, that's so sad, your son's not going to heaven. Like, she doesn't want to hear that. She's not here to talk about that. And because we don't have conversations, we're not even preparing our own church members to engage in the conversation, whether or not you are affirming or accepted theology. The essential thing is that we have created a safe space for hate language. We have created unsafe space for LGBT people to find God and be a part of his of the church body, of our church membership. It's not easy, even in some contemporary churches I've been in, there's still hesitation. And part of that, I think, is that, conferences may penalize pastors who would, create waves in this direction. So there may be some that want to talk about it, but they know that they're going to get in trouble for talking about it. And that's what the risk my dad was more than willing to take. He was excited for it, but he's a wild, crazy man. But yeah, so I mean, it's a whole conversation. Lots of conversations need to be had. And there's more than just one side or another. There are so many different ways to like come out on this, and then all of them ending up with like, we need to love everybody. And that's ultimately what I hope the seed I planted creates in the future. I think in 5 years, I could see another thing happening, and maybe something with more, I don't know, maybe some like seminary teachers like coming in and talking about stuff, or it could be more pastors that want to talk about it. It could be more LGBT Christians. They could have kinship like inside the building, just to like be an option. I think that could happen.
Yeah, that was the number one question we had when people came by the table is, why are you out here and not inside? And, I think people don't understand why the church is not ready to talk about it. So some definite, the winds of time are changing, or whatever.
When was Kinship founded? 1978?
A long time ago, a little over 40 years ago. Yeah.
Because I was looking at that. I know PFLAG is one of the oldest organizations that was supporting of LGBT community, and that's like parents of LGBT. And they're like, I just looked it up. It's 1973, so Kinship is almost as old as that, and so that's pretty incredible. You know, I know Floyd, when you came up to me and you're like, "You don't know who I am, do you?" I was like,
no.
And you like read my name tag, and I saw like Kinship. I was like, "Oh no!" I felt like I got caught as a kid skipping class. That's how, because I was like, "Oh no, I've known about Kinship all these years." No, Floyd, I don't know why I've never joined Kinship. That was there's no reason I did or didn't. It didn't end up happening. And I'm just, it really felt like, you totally forgot to turn in your term paper in that moment. I was
sorry.
Like,
I wanted to put you on the spot, but not really. Not
right. No, I did. Yeah. I mean, I'd say it just, but it felt in a way, I was like, more like I knew I should have been part of this a long time ago. But I'm glad we're connecting now.
Yeah. And I hope that, we can get your voice and your energy more involved with Kinship. And because we want to have those conversations. We want to have them on the various Adventist campuses. We want to have them in the churches. We want to get the young people involved, hopefully to stay in the church and find that the church is a place for them and for everyone. So definitely. And I was thinking when I saw you up there, we were talking, there was a lot of things going on for PKs there at Called, for preachers' kids. They had a lot of activities and stuff. But I was thinking, here's Jordan, but Jordan is only one of many. I mean, I know a lot of Adventist pastors who have a queer child. Mm-hmm. And most of them do not acknowledge that they have a queer child, unlike your dad, who was like proud, hey, my gay son's going to be on the panel with me.
I have felt so guilty in a way for having such a great set of parents, really. Like I said, my mom wasn't overbearing. I have great relationship with both my mom and my dad. That didn't happen for me. I was just so lucky to have them. I tell them, I was like, I live in fear because how am I going to be as good as the parents as mine were to me? It's just like, how can I live up to that standard? And I'm sure I can, but it's incredible. And so I do feel like if I could give just a tiny piece of that love that my parents have for me, despite all this, to everybody, I would, because I was willing to go and deal with this for maybe a year or two of kind of coming around. And I wish it had just came right away. And so I wish I could give some of that love to everybody. And in a way I can, make your family of choice be the one that supports you if you don't have a family of origin that can right now. Put your eggs into a basket that's not going to break them in front of you. So find that love where you can.
Yeah. Cool. So if there are other PKs, gay or queer PKs listening, what should they do?
Oh man. So I know I talked about my coming out story in the last episode, and of course I came out with a very lucky and honestly unusual from the norm coming out experience with such affirming parents that are pastors and creating a called panel and then hoping he can bring his son on but was going to do it without him, kind of thing. But I don't know that everybody's ready for that. I think you eventually you have to become your authentic self. You have to find safety first to come out, because I know there's a lot of people that may have had experiences like mine, oh, my life was better when it came out, but it's not the case for everybody. If there's going to be a safety issue, find safety, find, a supportive, family of choice, supportive network. And in a way, you can also find supportive churches, or at least more supportive churches for anybody, really. If your church family is not working out, there's some toxicity, it's not working out for you, or even just, it just doesn't feel right for you. There's other churches, and Adventist churches, they're depending where you are, they're around. So, I mean, you can find that in a lot of places in the same way that anybody, even if you're LGBT or not, if you're not being supported by your family of origin, find that safety and coming out. And I think just coming out and showing that causes the cognitive dissonance that needs to happen. So if your pastor family, parents are not ready for it, and they, you move out to, go to Loma Linda like I did and live in Southern California where there's whole streets where the crosswalks are rainbow out here, and then you come out and just let them know and let them come to terms or whatever they need to do, or if, you know, if it's just not safe, if it's toxic and they want to try to do something worse, they cut you off, you know, you're creating a cognitive dissonance, and they have to make their choice at that point. And maybe the choice they initially make isn't great, but you're showing that I'm still your kid. I'm still the kid you love. I'm still the kid that wants to, you know, feel loved by you. And I'm just that this is just part of who I am. And I think, you know, no kid comes out exactly how parents hope for, and they have to come to terms with that. That's part of their journey too. And the more that that's out and the more that happens, maybe they discuss that more with their friends. Maybe they discuss that more with other pastors. More conversations like this are happening behind closed doors. More of them will happen in front of, you know, open doors. They need to happen with all members of the church, not just pastors, but you know, it plants seeds in the long run. And I wish, you know, happy families and happy life for everyone, but I know it's not the cause or the possible for everyone. But like I said, if I could share a tiny piece of that love that my parents gave me, I would absolutely take more heat from them to like share that with everybody out there. You know I said in the last episode, I have a special place for pastors' kids, especially. I was more inspired. I was like, ooh, let's do more panels at Called. And I would much rather, I think, have come in and done a whole panel on pastors' kids. Like, how do we find their spiritual gifts? How do we like give them grace? How do we like, you know, what are the considerations to raise them differently? I'm still in like a qualitative idea. I have no research on any of that, but like, I would love to do that. So I think pastors' kids, we have a special place in that way. You know, when people hear I'm just like, I'm a gay pastor's kid, immediately, doesn't matter who they are, they're like, oh, okay, you know, automatically assuming that my dad didn't support me, you know. And so I think that that's the case, because I think in large part that's true, because so many pastors feel that they aren't allowed to have that space to even consider the acceptance that they need to. When ultimately all the laws and prophets hang on: love the Lord your God with all your might, all your soul, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself, no matter who they are, no matter if they're lepers, no matter if they're tax collectors, no matter if they're LGBT, no matter if they're Democrat or Republican. We have to love everyone, and that's one small step towards that.
Wow, that's a sermon right there. That paragraph. That is good. That is very good. Yeah. So I'm going to put in a real quick plug for Kinship here. You know, Kinship is open to everybody, whether it's the rainbow community or the pastor who has a queer kid, or the person sitting in the pew who doesn't really understand or know what really means all those LGBTQ, whatever those letters are. Contact SDA Kinship, and I'll give you more information at the end here about, you know, how to reach us. But yeah, let's have a conversation, a discussion about it. We're open for that. We want to foster that. And for those who are in the rainbow queer community, you're not alone. There are a lot of us out there, a lot of you out there, and together our voices can actually make a larger sound than just a single voice. So let's join together and do that. So yeah. So before I wrap up, what's next for Jordan?
Oh yeah, what's next for me? Oh shoot. Okay, so there is a podcast I'm going to be on. We're going to record very soon. It will be the final episode on the podcast Seeking What They Sought, done with my good friends and pastors' kids that I grew up with, Sean Lenhoff and Anthony Leiter, both very good friends of mine growing up and still to this day. Jesse Churchill also grew up with him, and Eric Edstrom, who do that podcast as well. They are currently pastors and teachers in the Seventh-day Adventist community and working for Seventh-day Adventist. Eric Edstrom has an Emmy for doing stuff for Loma Linda TV show. So they have a podcast. It's called Seeking What They Sought. The whole point of it is like, how do we in today's day like look at what Adventists do and believe and go back to like the roots of it? Like, why is this the deal that we have? Why are we doing it this way? We've been talking about for like 4 seasons, how are we going to do an LGBT episode? And they have blown me out of the water, honestly, with how they decided to handle this. I didn't expect it to be as amazing as it has been, but they're looking at a lot of perspectives. So they're doing a series of like 4 or 5 episodes for their LGBT, started in Pride Month, but we're going into July now. I will be on their capstone episode because I again represent, like, I'm one of those guys. I grew up with them. Like, we were all friends. We all knew each other. And so I'm helping them on the final episode more to like react to the people that have the different theologies who were able to come on and talk. Alicia Johnston's recent episode came out as time we record recording this. And then Kendra from Spectrum, forgot her last name. And then they also interviewed Michael from another, I don't know, I forgot it. But yeah, so I'm going to be on the last episode of that. Sorry, I forgot everybody's names. It's getting kind of late over here. But I appreciate you having me on, Floyd. This has been amazing.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. It's been great. Hopefully we can have you on again and check and see where life has taken you.
Yeah, I'll be around.
So thanks for sharing with us today, and thanks for everyone for listening and watching us. We hope that today's podcast was interesting and has given our listeners some things to think about. Seventh-day Adventist Kinship is the only LGBTQIA+ affirming community for current and former Adventists. We welcome not only the Rainbow Alphabet members, but also parents and family members who want to learn more about how to support their loved ones, as well as supportive allies who stand with us to make a difference in our church and in our world. You can check us out on the web, sdakinship.org, or follow us on social media, SDA Kinship. And if you have any questions or comments, you can email me, info@sdakinship.org. And we look forward to having you with us on another podcast. Remember that you're not alone. God loves you unconditionally. And we want you to be the best authentic person you can be. And join us again next time. Take care. Have a good one.